What is possible, and what is just a bad case of shiny object syndrome? What is way in the future, and what can you reasonably expect in the near future as you're thinking about how to raise your game in 2023 for webinars and virtual or hybrid events? Hello, and welcome to 2023 and beyond, the future of webinar and virtual event tech. My friends, my name is Roger Courville, and of course, I'm here with my old friend, Aaron Cole. And you know that here at Virtual Venues, we specialize in connecting a really specific use case with the technology that makes that really happen. Well, what a better way to kick off 2023 than thinking about some of the things that 2023 technology will see versus things that are cool, but they're way on down the road. And so, you know us, we get paid to keep an eye on these things, some of which is cool and some of which is, yeah, that'll never happen. But with me again today, Aaron Cole, co-founder and chief ebullience officer of the Virtual Venues tribe.
Really special.
Hey, Aaron, what's the coolest thing we can do now that at one time we thought was, whoa, that'll never happen. No way.
Wow. Yeah. So let me think about that. I think some of the cooler things that we're doing now here at the end of our long year of 2022 absolutely are centered around better ways to network, better ways to engage. So I would wrap all of that up into essentially getting people off their hands and actually engaged in the environment, in the platform, in the webinar, whatever it happens to be. Hopin, as we've talked before, has a great example of that, where there's speed networking, where if you opt into it as a viewer, you will get paired up with one-to-one video chats with other people that meet criteria. So if you list IT as your area of professional expertise, it'll match you with other people that are listed as IT. It's pretty cool. So we are always looking for ideas where we are minimizing distractions, focusing on content, and then also finding ways to improve that networking functionality, what people are getting out of the event that we're running.
You know, interestingly, I just recently saw an assertion that AI will assist with that kind of thing, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, Hopins is like, oh, you put IT in your profile and they put IT in their profile, right? Or that kind of thing. Whereas something like artificial intelligence in the future will be able to match based on an algorithm, which could have a whole lot more nuance to it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think AI is such a big driver, and it's going to be a big driver, not only in our industry, but obviously in the world where we're looking to go as a society even too. And it's interesting, and we were just talking about this, Roger, just a minute ago, in terms of ecosystems that are just starting to be built, wrapped around what AI can potentially provide: content, thought leadership, metrics, reporting. All of that is very, very interesting. Another thing that I've seen that I think is actually pretty cool and is being worked on is on 24. I don't remember when it was, but it was earlier this year, I believe, that they released an AI component of their system where, as you are ending a webinar, and if you have this set up in your On24 platform, the system will generate what it feels are interesting next items. So possibly a webinar archive or something based on the profiles that it can tell on that person that is in that event, that is watching the end of the event. So if you've built up a history of people watching your webinars, that system, as I think it improves and as it gets better, is eventually going to have the ability to say, okay, this is a person that's in IT, therefore we did this event on IT thought leadership 6 months ago. I'm going to serve that up as a possible next step of content that individual might be interested in consuming. Pretty cool. Yeah. I think all of that, it's all based around that idea of prolonging the connection and really getting to know your audience.
Well, you know what? Let's start there. And if you have just tuned in, I'm barely going to call this a roadmap, but we're going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. We're going to spend a little time talking about what is real and what's hype with regard to like virtual reality. We're going to talk about the platforms themselves, right? What are some of those things where we're starting to see hints or what could happen there? And then maybe even just some non-standard kinds of things. And I'll just pick up the ball and run with it because, Aaron, the thing that you mentioned about something that On24 is doing, that begins to touch down in so many places, right?
Agreed.
For instance, I mean, we've probably all experienced an AI bot on a website where before you actually get to talk to a real human being at Amazon or your bank, you know, a lot of frequently asked questions can get answered by a bot. Well, why aren't those things in virtual events? I don't know. Somebody just hasn't gotten there yet. And but I'll just share, just to continue on that line. To me, when it comes to thinking about the nature of communications, what does AI do? And I'll narrow that down to promotion. And I say that only because I went out and did some testing in advance of this. If you ask artificial intelligence, chat GPT, or which is part of the OpenAI project, I just subscribed to Hello Scribe. And I just went and said, hey, create for me an invitation for a webinar to banking professionals. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Right?
Yeah.
And for that to, whether that's having it auto generate, I'm not saying auto post, but auto generate a variety of ideas for social media posts. So there's those possibilities outside of the platform that some of which start really touching down on today. Yeah. And some of which is going to require a vendor to get on board going, oh, we could use AI to pair people like what you were just describing in speed dating in Hopin, right? Instead of it being driven off the profile they created in Hopin, what if it also crawled the web and looked at their LinkedIn profile or something like that, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly. I think there's a couple variables, and it's fascinating to watch these things evolve and grow over time and become legitimate markets and ideas that people get to the point where they're willing to invest in, you know, either that they're willing to invest as a product or, you know, even essentially even opening up a business to pursue that. But I think there's a convenience factor of it. So, you know, going to chat GTP and saying, write my content for this webinar coming up, and it does a pretty good job of that. That's a huge time saver. And that's obviously something that people will look at as a convenience and as an efficiency that something can just very easily, a computer can just very easily create, and it's going to pass muster. It's going to get through your marketing and legal compliance because it's going to highlight the things that needs to be highlighted, and you're good to go from there. I think there is also, though, and I think this is kind of where you're getting at, Roger, there is the deeper level of AI where it starts bringing you not only the convenience factor, but the ability to provide richer, deeper, more meaningful data sets, either on your participants, on your market, on the products you're selling, or whatever it happens to be that your event is doing. You know, like the example you just mentioned a minute ago about potentially even mining into attendees' LinkedIn profiles in real time on an event to therefore then spin up related content that might either be relevant to those people on an individual basis, or even potentially from a networking standpoint, finding ways to create that in real time. In some ways, it's no different than what would happen if you are at a physical event and you're standing around the coffee table drinking and, you know, coffee, and you're just chatting with someone and you're like, what are your interests? You know, in some ways it's no different than that. But it's potentially massively powerful. And it goes back to that same thing that I know I always kind of harp on, but we can't get away from the content. We can't get away from the value of the message, at least that our clients are wanting to send out and are wanting to get people to listen and to take home with them. And so making sure that happens, but not getting in the way of the messaging, I think is going to be key.
Yeah. And that level of personalization helps. I mean, personalization drives optimization, right? And optimization drives valuation. I mean, here's a couple things that I'm seeing applied elsewhere that I think can and will catch up. If we think about what's way on out there versus what's possible, doesn't mean your favorite webinar or virtual event technology provider is going to do it tomorrow, but for instance, back in the early 90s, Peppers and Rogers kind of went viral, so to speak, back then with the idea of one-to-one marketing or mass one-to-one. And right, I mean, I saw a news story just in the last few days of somebody using an AI chatbot to pester Comcast for a refund. Somebody else did something which made me think, oh, what if AI could personalize delivery of a confirmation or a reminder email? So instead of it being, okay, 1 day in advance or 1 hour in advance, what if that could actually be go out and sense when the best time was for Aaron versus Roger, right? Think about what MailChimp does. You go, hey, you want to test, and you can go send out a test, and based on that test, it will then suggest a particular course of action. But that's different for my list of thousands versus going, what's optimum for Roger or Aaron or Julie or Pradeep?
Right. Well, it'd take you forever to do that without some way to be able to automate that process. You'd never get to actually to the point of sending that email out if you yourself were drilling into that level of detail on a client by client basis. It's pretty impressive. And again, it'll be interesting to see where the market and what people are willing to spend and invest in. But it's pretty crazy how far it has come in a relatively short time. And to your point, Roger, the possible use cases in our industry and in a lot of industries are really profound. And so I do think that it's going to be something we're going to hear more and more and more of it as we go on.
Let me throw out just a couple more, and then we'll switch to maybe virtual reality. And I think we'll probably end up coming back to AI because it's going to touch down in a number of things, both future and now, right? So for instance, what if you were using AI to not just create copy, but an intro script or a visual version, right? So my bookkeeper has loved to remind me that I've spent literally $6,500 on stock images over time, licensing them like iStock Photo and that kind of thing. But now you've seen it on Facebook, right? Somebody creating some amazing picture going, I just plugged that into AI and here it comes. And I'm like, well, couldn't you create presentation slides that way? Where if you said, hey, I want to show the relationship between this and this over the course of the next few months. And now it creates a visual for you that saves you an ever living ton of time in terms of communicating visually. I'm just making stuff up, but I mean, that hypothetically possible like right now.
And there's a good chance that might even be more direct and more point on in terms of that visual graphic than anything you would find on iStock or wherever you happen to be looking at. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. We are actually already, we have a couple clients that we've worked with in this past year where we are using automation. This is a little bit different, but it's on a similar level where we're using automation to actually run the welcome scripts that we're doing. So gone are the day, and it's been years and years and years that we've always, done the housekeeping, the welcome, the fasten your seatbelts and make your tray tables upright and all that stuff for a webinar. We don't have to do that anymore. And more importantly, there's a better way to do it. It's not just that we're getting out of that messaging, because there is still content and messaging that we want to make sure people know, but here's a better way to do it. And it involves less human from a standpoint of someone not reading it, but still that level of interaction and that ability to get the point across of what you need to do. And we're not relying on a voice to do that. We're not relying on some creative department to come up with, very cool slides or something like that. We can do it all using some of these tools.
Yeah, I know somebody who years ago would actually work with a presenter to create the script and then the recording for their presentation. And then she would actually go back and create the slides so that she could create lots of them and they communicated perfectly and transitioned perfectly at the exact right time. And I'm like, oh man, how much less time would that be now? Here's one right now kind of use case where it's not driven by AI, but I think could be a really powerful thing that we could end up getting to not too far down the road, which is the way that some platforms like WebEx Event Center allow you to prioritize what questions bubble up to the panelists and organizer panelist presenters based on a set of rules that, evaluates when they joined, when they signed up for your webinar. And if they're a VP or higher, make sure their questions bubble up to the top
Right.
of the queue. Right.
Right.
Well, you
Yep.
could get a whole lot more nuanced with something like that if it was driven by AI, because you could begin to apply or set up a set of parameters and let it go make intelligent choices about which questions are more or less relevant.
Right. Right. Yep. Absolutely. We even, this is a little bit of a tangent, so bear with me, but we occasionally will still work with some companies where they are still in a mindset of more conference call type of Q&A sessions where they will actually, from their preference, have a paid moderator getting everybody's name so that they know who's important and who's likely to ask the most important questions live over the phone. And then they will take those questions first, which works. And it's worked for decades, obviously. And there are still companies that are doing that, from investor call, relation calls, things like that. But very clearly, to your point, there is bubbling up better and more innovative ways to cull out the information that you want and find the questions you want to get to, find the important things in that sea of data. I think that's another thing, actually, we haven't even talked on yet as well, but there's so much data, it's only going to increase. And so finding ways to be more proactive and more efficient with culling through the amount of data that we all live within is going to be huge too. And so it literally is limitless when you think about the different use cases and areas that something like this can be adopted in across the board.
Yeah, I think one of the cool little functions that language-driven models now provide the ability to do that I would love to see in webinar platforms, particularly for larger events or those kinds of events that have more difficulty with personalization, because say you're doing a live stream internally to the team, an all hands on deck meeting, and it's just 2,000. That language summarization is pretty powerful. I can imagine it not even just saying which question should we be prioritized in the questions panel, but summarizing, right? Oh, you've had 300 questions come in. What if it summarized that and said, hey, here's kind of one that will hit the center of the bullseye for 20 of those.
Huge.
And, I was telling Aaron right before we joined here, their brand new plugin in Chrome using ChatGPT that I used just yesterday to summarize the entirety of a YouTube video. And I'm like, and one of the things that this stuff will start to do now is do that kind of thing in real time. Now that brings up a whole different thing about how do we have presenters ready to utilize that kind of thing in real time. Yep. But maybe that's a good reason to then sneak on to our next topic. Aaron, I know you've got a couple cool use cases in your back pocket with regard to virtual reality or augmented reality. Maybe even make a distinction for us to kick things off to say what's real and what's hype.
Yeah, great call out. Great segue too. So there is a difference between virtual reality and augmented reality. Virtual reality is that immersive experience. You have to wear headgear. Everyone's seen the VR sets that Google and others have put out. But it's an immersive experience where visually, audibly, and in some cases, even from a smelling whatever that word is, olfactory, I think, something like that. Even from a smell standpoint, you are treated to an experience that is all virtual and happening as a part of that headset that you're wearing. It's immersive. It has absolute potential and ramifications in the world of events that we're in. I would be frank to say that there are some downsides or some things that I think we see that the market has to accommodate or bake into its designs as it's going, but it is something that a lot of people are talking about. Augmented reality is different in that it is not this completely immersive environment that you see when you put on headsets. It's more augmenting what you see on a daily basis if you're at a conference or a trade show. And the easiest way to think about that is the old Google eyeglasses I can't remember the name of those now when they first came
right.
out. But you put them on and you're able to scroll through documents, or you're able to see elements of things that are not there exactly, but are placed there as an augmented version of what you are seeing. And, everyone has heard of like Pokemon Go, whenever that was out in a couple years ago, and everyone had that downloaded as an app on your phone, and you're walking around and you can see augmented elements of your reality via that app. So it's a totally different, augmented reality is definitely different than virtual reality. Number one. Augmented reality also does have absolute ramifications and potential in the markets that we're in, but it is more of an augmented admin to the actual experience that people are going in. It's not a replacement, so to speak, that virtual reality is more of.
Yeah. I think in some ways, a lot of folks can guess both what the opportunity and the problem is, right? The opportunity is, well, what does spatiality look like, right? I consulted with an aftermarket auto parts manufacturer that was doing webinars for auto mechanics. And probably a lot of people are going, what? Webinars for auto mechanics? And they would get 400 or 500 people like regularly on these things. And that's because the finer nuance that they actually were kind of got to a whole lot faster than their competitors was there's a lot you can do with regard to communicating about how to test the fuel filter of an E85 fuel filter of a hybrid, Ford F-150.
All right.
But some things cannot be done virtually, right? Like actually hands-on. But then there's this place in between where if you had a 3D headset on, you could walk around the car and see that from multiple angles in a whole lot easier way than it would, say, someone, would have to shoot a video of that kind of surround experience and then play the video. But that's the upside. The downside, of course, is, well, then everybody's got to have a headset, right? Now, I'll say this is a big picture thought, but unless you missed it just recently in the last couple months, Microsoft announced support for the metaverse for Microsoft Office. Right?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and I forget which big there was a big accounting or consulting firm that said they were going to do this pilot with like 1,500. But what does that require? That requires 1,500 people to all have virtual reality headsets, right? So that you can log on and collaborate on a document or, have a virtual meeting in a different way. So obviously some of that is way on down the road, but I'll say this, and then I'll kick it over to you for another thought. There was a time when we thought having a webcam built into everything, including your phone, was a crazy idea, right? Or you had to buy a webcam separately from your computer. Now, do you plan to use it or plan not to use it because only 20% of people have webcams? Now everybody's got a webcam.
Right.
And I'm not predicting that that'll happen anytime soon. So I'm predicting it won't happen anytime soon with regard to VR headsets. But that could bring up some rather interesting possibilities. Here's one that I love the idea of, right? Think about, because I'm always going, okay, what do we do in person? And then what do we want to do online? And how do we mimic that or overcome certain barriers? Well, think about some of the nature of why you go to Vegas for a trade show. It's because Vegas, outside of the trade show, might be entertaining, or some other extracurricular activity that's part of attending a conference. Well, is there any reason you couldn't say, hey, for a part of our conference in the evening, we're going to run a virtual field trip and we're going to show you the local historical markers for near our headquarters here in Poughkeepsie, New York, or whatever that might be. And that could be, he's laughing at me.
Poughkeepsie, man. Beautiful place. Been there.
I know you have.
Anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I
think we tend to think unidimensionally. Oh, okay, that's for games. That's for kids. Yeah. Oh, that'll never happen because I don't own a VR headset. Therefore, nobody owns a VR headset or whatever. And yeah, that might be a little far reaching, but there's some pretty cool stuff that you could do if you got
Yeah.
creative.
Yep. I think you hit the nail on the head right there, Roger, right there, because the I won't call it a danger, but you have it. We all have a tendency to segment and silo our daily lives into various compartments, and by doing that and saying, okay, this is what VR does. My son has a VR headset and he's playing games. That's what you'd use VR for, and that's it. That's potentially where you might lose or miss out on things. And I want to go back to what you said a minute ago about the Microsoft adoption or licensing of their Office and 365 into metaverse, because isn't that, it's really, really interesting to me, because that very clearly shows you where they feel there are levels of growth and potential that they're obviously trying to get ahead of and invest in. And if you think about that from your use cases as a standpoint, having even a document, that you've got Word doc up on your desktop or something like that, it's obviously still an electronic version of your typing, but being able to have that live both on your desktop, but then in a virtual reality type of an environment for collaboration or for whatever reasons that you would do that, that's pretty powerful. And that might very well be a clue to where this might gain traction. I agree with you. I think that when we're talking about some of the hurdles, obviously the adoption of everyone owning a headset, that's going to be something that will, I think, eventually get there as the technology improves and it becomes less cumbersome and less invasive as something that you might visibly wear. I don't know of a lot of people that would want to wear a VR headset for 8 hours a day, for example, in a nothing but a VR type of a conference. Would never probably want to do that. But there might be a point, and there likely will be a point when that technology improves, that might become a barrier or no longer be a barrier. Another one that I think is one that we are starting to also be more cognizant of is a big move in our world is furthering the push towards accessibility and accommodations and ADA compliance type things, where we want to make sure that anyone, regardless of who you are or abilities or skill sets, are able to consume the content and whatever. A lot of VR type environments nowadays require movement. They require things that don't completely translate to a ADA compliance type mindset. And I think that might also be one that might gradually grow a little bit in terms of its importance, that the industry has to figure out and come up with solutions around, so that that's a population that's not segregated out of that ability to participate in a truly VR experience.
Yeah.
So I think those are all, it's again, similar to AI, it's a really interesting world. And it might also even be that, baby steps, where you were just talking about, you go to Vegas and there's a the VR party in Poughkeepsie or whatever it happens to be, that night or something like that, or some levels of gamification. I always think that gamification can be a very substantial and important driver for new ideas and new technology, because it's fun and it's things that people like to do. And that typically can be a very easy path to adoption. If you make it fun, you make it memorable, people are going to want to do it more. And then that is a little bit where it becomes more sticky. So we'll have to see.
Here's a distinction. Somebody listening to this going, oh yeah, okay, that's all cool. That's so far in the future. And thanks for hanging out with us, by the way, since we're thinking these things through. But here is a distinction that actually might be useful for you to consider, right? Because when you talk about using Microsoft Office and a VR headset, you're talking about a meeting, typically, right? That's collaboration. And there is a lot of presentation or more formal kinds of communications where it's like, oh, okay, I don't need do I need a VR headset when I could just have a killer monitor and a couple speakers and turn up the music loud and feel the bass and the excitement of the room in a virtual presentation. But here's a distinction. One of the things that I think more sophisticated event planners are beginning to get to in the virtual world, and sometimes they don't use this language, but here's the behavioral driver, which is how do we blend the formal and the informal? For instance, I'm one of my regular clients does, a 3-day continuing medical education seminars for pediatricians, right? And they do certain segments of lecture, but then they'll move into breakout rooms where there's hands-on work. And sometimes that's self-directed and sometimes it's facilitator led. But here, that's the distinction. When you're making the presentation, right? It's the plenary session for everybody, the welcome kickoff. That's a pretty formal, controlled kind of a communication. But if you wanted to let somebody go really explore with VR, it's them directed, not you directed. Yeah. Right. And so that time of going, now between sessions, you can go wander around the exhibit hall or something like that is a self-directed activity. So whether that self-directed activity was like a virtual lab in a learning environment or interacting with in true kind of spatiality, interacting with an object in a dimensional sort of way, I don't want to watch you do it. I want to reach up and spin the object around and look at the other side of it, right? And blending those two, knowing which use case best suits what part of the communication experience regarding your content and the experience that you want to create, has some exciting possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's never going to be this just all or nothing. It's going to be that slow, gradual adoption of whatever it happens to be, as a way to get people to use the technology or use the product more and more. And there are websites and there are platforms that have come out in the recent, during COVID that are very much forward leaning on that whole spatial reality type of a design where, you're as much a part of the venue and you're interacting with that as a part of being there and consuming the content. And so it'll be interesting to see how those platforms do, how they survive and how they grow. We just always want to be cognizant of, if we go completely into that type of a design, we want to be cognizant where we don't want the technology of the environment to eclipse, again, the content. And I know I mentioned that a few minutes ago, but it's hugely important where we want to make sure that whatever the messaging is, that's what people are consuming and that's what they're taking away. And it's, in some ways, it reminds me a little bit of when virtual events started, whatever, 12 years ago, whatever it's been now. And a lot of the initial adoption of that allowed you as a participant, dress up your avatar and put a different, shirt on your avatar. And that's what you're going to walk around with. You really don't see that very much anymore in terms of the virtual environment. And there's a reason for that. And I think that reason is because, again, that started to potentially run a little bit astray from the reason that people will go to event, physical, virtual, hybrid, whatever, content, networking, collaboration. And that's what we always want to make sure we're cognizant of. So
yeah, no, that's actually a great point. And maybe we wrap up kind of the VR section by thinking about, hey, if you want to get creative today, what are some of the things that you can do today that are forward leaning? But I'll just make one comment on what you just said. To me, that shiny object syndrome is a challenge, right? Way back then, Second Life, or you could have wings and I could look like a princess or whatever. That wears off, right? Some of you of sufficient age, like those of us here on this call who've been in this industry now countable in decades that require more than one hand to count. Some of us remember when that same thing happened with PowerPoint, right? You remember this. Some brand new person gets into PowerPoint, they discover animations, and next thing you know, you got flying crud from Mars, all over your PowerPoint slides, when really the question is, hey, what part of this thing moving is part of the communication experience, right? Like communicating dimensionality or directionality, which is a useful thing for PowerPoint animations versus not. That, I think, is one of the challenges, because when the rubber meets the road, we've got to do real business with real people. And that doesn't mean we can't have a little fun along the way, but you just wearing an artificial Hawaiian shirt,
probably not going to
right? That's kind of like backgrounds too, to me. Right. So what can we do today? I'll just throw out one that you already mentioned: networking. One of those things that is virtual like that might be cool with a VR headset down the road can be done right now, right? I mean, the way Hopin does that is really cool, and it's applicable like right now. Other thoughts about what we could do like right now?
Yeah.
Or as someone's planning out 2023?
Yeah. Well, yes. We're always going to come at that discussion from the standpoint of not necessarily chasing the shiny objects, but making sure that we establish a value for what it's going to do and what it's going to present into an environment or a meeting. And that's not even just when we're only talking about VR, we're talking about anything in terms of making sure that that lines up correctly with the content people are going to consume and people are willing to pay to have their content available so that people can consume it. And our clients come to us to make sure that what they need to present to their audience, whoever it happens to be, is going to be in the best possible environment to consume that. And so we don't want to get away from that. This is not VR related, but one thing that you mentioned Hopin just a minute ago. One of the cooler things that we were just talking about this just a minute ago in terms of these developing like little markets around AR and AI and stuff like that, where, you know, Hopin has a growing list of API related programs that they can you can integrate into your Hopin environment, which a lot of platforms are doing it, which is really smart because it opens up that universe a little bit larger that you can add some really cool things into it. And we love to sit down with clients and kind of think through, okay, let's get really creative and think about how do we want to do this? And what this might be is just maybe it's a silly game or a leaderboard or some way to do trivia that is going to be relevant. But again, we're defining what that use case is, and then we're getting creative about how can we do it in a fun way. And there's some really cool products out there that are like, you know, fun to use and people enjoy using them, and it's like, wow, that actually worked really well, and we grow on that. So I think that a lot of it has to do with, at least from our standpoint, making sure that we're looking at it again, not to necessarily chase the shiny objects, but to make sure that there's a reason why we are adding a shiny object in whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. But to your point about getting really creative, here's a few things that I've worked on just in the last couple of years, just to drop ideas, right? Because we keep saying Hopin because it's more a virtual event platform, multi-day, multi-session kinds of things. But I've done this in GoTo, I've done it in Zoom, where more than once I've emceed an event where we had a live after hours DJ. And one time in Zoom, there was a virtual dance party, and I literally spent, I'm not kidding, 2 hours spotlighting dancers. And you spotlight this person, and okay, Aaron's tired and sits down. So I turn off that spotlight and spot somebody else. And now it's kind of like, you know, people looking at themselves in the Jumbotron, you know, in a ballpark, and they see their face go by on the Jumbotron and they get all excited because you just spotlit them.
Yes.
I've worked with them doing that with dance performers who were going to do a dance. And the question was, how do we get them ready to be part of the experience? And lest that sound like pure entertainment, it was actually for personal care for caregivers. So it wasn't just dance. It was actually an audience participation thing. And so the nature of, if you just get creative, you can do an amazing number of things. Now, I'm not saying it's the same, but it's amazing how it can be a whole lot different than the typical meeting info barf over PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. And to your point, exactly. In some ways, it doesn't really matter what the platform is, because what we're looking at doing is remaining fresh, making sure that there are things that we're furthering, pushing the needle on engagement and adoption and networking on all of that. You know, another one that you just spurred my mind on that we're doing a lot of now, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in the market, is the use of these, I'll call them programs that allow more of a layperson to do fairly advanced levels of video production. So like, you know, OBS, and I know, Roger, you use Ecamm quite a bit, or vMix is another one, where you can very easily get creative with what's going into the media player of your archive or your streaming event or whatever you're using that technology for. It used to be that you had to have, more of a production mindset, and you had to have the right skills, like like a Blackmagic ATM or a Mini or something like that you had to have the equipment that you bought, the skill sets, the ability to do it, and then those production level chops to be able to put it all together. That's all very largely gone. And, for a minimal monthly fee, you can have an app on your computer that allows you to do things like lower thirds or interesting backdrops or whatever it happens to be, or even the picture-in-picture like we're in right now, elevating your game. And you can do that in Zoom. You can do it in GoToWebinar. You can do it in anything. And that's another powerful one. And I see that again and again and again, where it's a very easy way to increase the quality of your game, the quality of what you're sending out to your audience.
What about other things that are either non-standard ways of thinking about the future of, or even things that we would love to see platforms do? I'll tell you why I asked the first question. I realize that was a double question. If there's a trend that we've all seen growing up, unless you're 18, it was that in the old days of advertising, it got too expensive to advertise during prime time at 6 or 7 and 8 o'clock. So people started moving what they did outside of prime time. And one of the trends that I've seen that is a part of future of, to me, is moving outside of prime time, right? It's like used to be, you could only go to the dentist Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And now there are dentists who will stay open later on a weeknight or on a Saturday. And I've seen that same kind of thing in terms of people making their events or some aspect thereof available outside of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday between, 9 and 1 or that kind of thing. Yeah. Just curious, anything that you've seen that are just kind of non-standard ways of thinking about where the future is going, trends that are touching down, you think, in the next year?
Great question. I think there are some of the trends that we've talked about here today, I think are going to be very solid drivers. Some of the other trends that I see in the market and having impacts are ones that have been for years, growing and growing. For our clients, for example, the value of the data that you're mining as a webinar producer or as a webinar marketer or something like that, the value of the data you're generating is only becoming more and more valuable. And there's a very conscious drive to have that data become more actionable, not just of value sitting in a static database, but being able to provide things, excuse me, even as easy as lead scoring, or being able to be fed into an AI predictor that provides ways to spit out more meaningful levels of interaction even that you can have with potentials. That's a big one. And we almost always start that process from a standpoint of API type integrations, where the first thing we're doing is we just want to get the data out of its rest state in a database and have that become actionable for our users. So have that be pushing to Eloqua or have that be pushing to whatever a customer's CRM is, and have that then become more of a hub where data is going in and out and in and out. And it's not necessarily in that rest state. It's in an active state that then is providing more value. I think that's never going to go away. And that's been one that's been growing for years and years. But I still see that one being fairly important. I was trying to think of another one here that I've seen that's coming up. Go ahead and I'll think of it while you're.
I've just here's just one that came to mind. And if you're listening, we got, we'll wrap up in the next 10 or so, but here's one that I think is interesting, just based on a very recent announcement, which is searching Google search within a video.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So one of the trends, and if you've listened to me speak or read my blog, I use this term Netflixification that I made up, where certain elements really should be live, But behavior is also shifting to some people wanting to consume or binge on their own time, right? And it's not right or wrong. We still want to watch news or watch sports live in real time, but sometimes we want to sit down and have the content that we want right now. And I think when we think about the life cycle of webinar series, for instance, or how do I let people go back and access the recordings of my virtual event that had 4 keynotes and 12 breakouts over the course of a couple days? The way you can do it now is to generate a transcript for each one of those and make that transcript something that is text searchable, so that if you want that to be indexable by Google, well, hallelujah, you can do that now. But the idea that now your video content, assuming you want it to be public and findable, just being able to put it out there in a manner that can be crawled by Google, so that that content becomes part of what someone can find when they search, I think could be some interesting implications for what do we do with event recordings.
Absolutely.
Do I just leave it sitting in Zoom or on 24, or do I want to go host it on a site where now it could be more purposeful?
Right. There are companies that are solely focused on that as an idea of providing that level of searchability. And to your point, it absolutely has ramifications in how content is consumed, how content is located, how content is repurposed. We do a lot of work with larger financial firms, and I'm aware of even some of our larger financial clients. This is outside of events per se, but they're even looking at adopting that technology from a call center standpoint, from a process standpoint, to be able to search through literally hundreds of thousands of hours of recorded call content for those little nuggets of information that they can pull out on what's going on in that call center, for example. It takes someone millions of years to go through that and find those things that something like that can scan, can combine, and can deliver back to the requester in a very quick manner. And it would be the same thing if I'm searching on Google for something and I get a video clip hit of something that's matching the search or whatever, I might be searching on. Hugely valuable. And I would agree completely. That's one that I think we're going to see more and more adoption of. And I think it does, final thought, I think it does go in line with that general overall recognition that recorded content is valuable. Gone are the days of just running a live event and just putting up the archive in WebEx and just letting it kind of peter out there. That content is valuable to someone. You just have to find who that person is and get it in front of them. And maybe it takes breaking it up, to your point, Roger, and having it be repurposed, or maybe it takes putting it somewhere else. But the value of your content, you should never disregard that, because that can be a massive value over the long run.
Yeah. And I think one of the great value drivers there, I mean, I would imagine plenty of folks go, yeah, my recorded content is really valuable, but it takes me a long time to A, B, C, D, E, F, G to get those things then ready to utilize in some other way, relative to being able, what if you took 90% of the labor out, because now AI or something or the way Google is now going to search and index videos, it just could be a very interesting opportunity where the question to ask is, all right, we're using On24, Zoom, WebEx, GoTo, whatever. Is my content something that is now exposed, or I have the ability to expose that which I want to expose to Google's crawlers so that it could be found? Here's one of those in the experience category rather than the content category that I like, because it's doable right now. Years ago, we literally did gigs where we FedExed lunch to someone. We had one where it was like coffee and chocolate, and you to join us for lunch time coffee and chocolate, and they got a mug and hot chocolate and a piece of chocolate like in a chocolate bar. But there are companies where now you can integrate that with your virtual event. And if you want to send everybody lunch, this is kind of cool. You want to let everybody have lunch for a lunch and learn, for instance, you can determine what the budget is. It auto handles getting them lunch. So instead of you figuring out how to do that with regard to, oh, do I have Aaron's address and does he want no mayo with on his chicken sandwich? What you do is you set a budget and going, okay, every attendee's got $10 or $50 or whatever. And then it detects where Aaron is and provides him the list of DoorDash or Uber Eats opportunities specific to Aaron, who's in a different location than Roger, therefore might have different options, and then only shows them those that fit within the budget that you've determined, so that Aaron can order lunch or something like that. And maybe you've got a Panera Bread in your area and I don't. And that's smart. To me, that's fun in terms of going, all right, that could be a cool little way to think about creating an experience and engagement.
Yep. And I guarantee you, and I'm excited to even think about, a year from now, even having a similar conversation about, what's now something little cool that came up. There's undoubtedly going to be things like that. And being adaptive and being forward leaning into those things, I think, is the key. We're doing it smart. We want to make sure that we're doing it safely and not just chasing, the next greatest thing just because it happens to be the shiniest thing in the marketplace. But it fits, and there's something that we know we want to find. So there's so many of those things, and it'll be interesting to see again where we go.
Here's a final thought, and then I'm going to ask you just for your own final summary thoughts. Hey, what is the main nugget or two that you might reiterate here as we close up? But I'll just say this: some things, like whether it's that meal or the virtual networking or something like that, some part of future seems all space agey, right? Holograms or virtual reality headsets. But a lot of this stuff is future for your organization, right? We could do the meal delivery thing or some really cool stuff now that oftentimes people still haven't seen because they're just used to using Zoom in the same old way they've used Zoom for the last 10 years, right? And therefore, in your environment, to your organization, for your audience, that's a new cool thing, and you get to be the hero for bringing something like that out of your back pocket. And that's not 5 years from now. That's for your event in March.
Exactly. Yep. If you're a Microsoft shop, we can set up a stream that will push into your team's environment that will have video, audio, picture-in-picture, lower thirds, everything that you would normally see when you're watching a late night TV talk show or whatever it happens to be. We can do that tomorrow, and it looks really good. And if you are coming at this from a mindset of, my boss plugs in his webcam into the Teams event and we do an all hands, literally with a flip of a switch, we can up that game and add that +1 and have that look amazing. And to your point, Roger, there's a lot of things like that are kind of riding that wave of where things are going that are of value. It doesn't have to be 5 years down the future. It literally can be 5 days from now and what we can do.
So here's my final kind of summary thought. If I was going to say, hey, if there was one big takeaway that I think is worth repeating, I'm just going to say something that we've said using some different words, and then I'll ask you for yours, and then we'll wrap it here. But mine would be this. There's a lot of stuff, and it could be overwhelming, right? There are so many of these options out there, and yeah, that sounds cool and sexy and interesting, but sometimes it sounds expensive and it isn't, or sometimes it sounds way on out there and it isn't. And sometimes there's something that would be really expensive, but there's an inexpensive way to accomplish something similar to deliver your content and create more user-centric experiences for your audience. So I think all of that is probably worth a phone call, and always starting at the start, which is, hey, what would I want to do with my audience in person? Maybe that I've never thought possible you could do that with Zoom, but hey, these two weird guys from Portland had a couple ideas. Maybe we should talk. And that would be my invitation. Hey, let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. Yep. I would say 2 points to your 1 point, because I think your point is so valid.
Hey, you're the boss. You get 3 points if you want.
I think that we never want to get away. Again, I've said this, I feel like I'm repeating myself again and again and again, but we never want to get away from the message that is going to get delivered to the audience. We are going to find a way to encase that, encapsulate it in a medium that is going to work best and is going to be impactful. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people are walking out of that environment, whether it's with a headset or a hybrid event or whatever, with that message in their heads. And that's why what we do, we feel is important with the technology standpoint, but always understanding that the technology is the floor that the content lives on. So that would be thought number one. Thought number two, I'm going to go back to what we all learned in business class, which is that when we're looking at markets, ultimately products live and fail based on how they're adopted by the consumer. You know, those classes we all took in college about market economics and stuff like that. Ultimately, markets are dictated by what people choose to use and what they're willing to pay for. And I think that when I'm looking at our market right now, which saw this massive spike with COVID, and now we've seen an equally fairly substantial retraction in terms of consolidation of some of the larger players and consolidation of thoughts, getting back to physical events or defining hybrid, that's going to continue. But what that provides us is a very clear playing field to define what is going to be adopted and what's going to move forward from a market standpoint. And the consumer is going to drive that. And so we are very conscious of looking at that and seeing what looks like it's going to be adopted and seeing what fits, again, that ever-present equation of how do I best get my content to my populations, defining that from that equation versus, oh, hey, this is cool, this is expensive, but it's kind of shiny, you know, defining it from the market standpoint and the adoption and the messaging standpoint is going to be where I think things are going to lay. And that's where we're obviously fairly attuned to as well. That's it. I don't even need a third. I don't even need a third point. I'll
give you 14 if you want. But with that, let me point out one thing. If you're still listening to this, besides saying thank you, I will point this out. Yep. One of the blog posts that is going to come out not too long after this video posts on YouTube is going to be me doing a blog post about using AI to generate like promo copy, meaning, is it even possible? What's real? What's not real? I'm going to do a blog post with some examples. So head on over to virtualvenues.com and you'll be able to find that blog post. And that said, of course, I'm always pleased to have with me my longtime friend, Aaron. Yes, sir. And by the way, Aaron, at our age and level of experience, this dawned on me based on the way we talk, you and I end up going, oh yeah, a couple years ago. At our age, everything's a couple years ago. It's like, oh yeah. I remember back in 2006 when, yeah. Thank you for being here with us. Go check out the blog at virtualvenues.com, and we will catch you next time for the next episode of Thought Leader Conversations.